Brought to you by
Proto Labs. Real parts, really fast. Custom metal, plastic, and liquid silicone rubber parts in as fast as 1 day.
Was supposed to sit on the last chair. I don't know why. I have no idea why.
All right, so welcome back. You're going to kick off the second session here. We call it the bike. The bicycle, of course, it kind of hits that sweet spot for design where it's the intersection of form and function. And it also happens to be now, with transportation as a whole, it also is at the juncture of product and service. So I'll go ahead and introduce the panelists here. And for this presentation, the slides, they've been provided by the panelists, and it's just going to kind of cycle through. And it should be pretty obvious which ones correspond to which individual here. So at the opposite end of the stage, we have Michel Dallaire. He's an industrial designer. He's based in Montreal. He has hundreds of products to his name. You'll see them actually kind of go through. So the non-bicycle products were designed by Michel and his firm. We have him here today because he is the man who is behind the design of the bikeshare system, which New Yorkers know as City Bike, Chicagoans know as Divvy, and various other cities are familiar with his work as well. In the center, we have Ethan Frier of Project Aura. It's a bicycle lighting startup. You saw the video just a second ago. So actually, his story is kind of interesting because he reached out to us in 2011 about his project, which was just a grant-funded student project at the time. And I thought it was interesting. We posted the video, and that kind of went viral. And there was enough interest that he and his partner, Jonathan, who's in the audience, they were able to start a business when they graduated from Carnegie Mellon University last year. And then closest to me here is Edward Albert. He is a professor emeritus from Hofstra University, where he taught sociology for 25 years. And he's kind of a cycling historian of sorts. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to him for a little bit of background information.
I'm sort of odd man out. I know very little about design, but I know a lot about bike riding, and I kind of designed my career as a college teacher, professor, because we work short hours 2 days a week, or we did, and I could train on the other days of the week. So after racing for 25 years, I took up collecting bikes, and then I got interested in the history of the cultural history of cycling in New York, especially in New York. America is sort of an outlier as compared to Europe. For most of our history, the bicycle was a toy, and you gave it up when you got a driver's license. I think the same was true in Canada. Now it's becoming increasingly a tool, and certainly in the 1940s, the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it was unfashionable and clearly a tool. Bicycling was pretty much at a low point. There were pockets of bicycle racing. People were mostly middle class, lower middle class. They could afford one bike, and it had to be functional for a number of purposes. It had to maximize their ability to win on the weekends. It had to be useful to train on during the week. And given that the racing was all on fixed gears in those days, there was usually a brake hole drilled. So they would attach a brake to it. And frequently, people would commute back and forth from work on them because they could get in their miles that way. Now, one thing I think everybody knew about bike riding then, at least, and I think people who race now know it, is the thing about bike riding, it's not if you're going to fall, it's when you're going to fall. And anyone who rides for whatever purpose will eventually come to that realization. And a lot of what's happened over the history of cycling in the United States is that I think form has trumped function and has kept people perhaps out of the world of cycling. So, for example, in the 1890s, turn of the 20th century, bicycling was absolutely the biggest fad in the world. It was like the tulip craze in Holland. And then it went bust by World War I. In the 70s, we had the bike boom. Everybody was riding 10-speed bikes with drop bars, thin tires. They were totally inappropriate. People didn't know what to do with all the gears. They didn't know how to fix their flat tires, and they were uncomfortable. So most of those bikes ended up in the garage or in the storage lockers somewhere because they were not built to the needs of the people who were riding them. And to some degree, although I am an absolutely, full-on supporter of the new popularity in cycling, I am a bit worried. I read the New York Times or I read magazines, and whereas when I started in this sport, I never saw a bicycle. Now I see a bicycle being used to advertise almost every product I can think of. And that leads me to believe that there's a boom, and that boom has the potential of another bust. And there have been many of them. There's the Le Mans bust, there's the Lance Armstrong bust, and unless the bikes that are created today maximize function and minimize injury, I think we're in trouble again. A couple examples and then I'll stop. I haven't been pointing at the slides really, but this is Nancy Burkhardt. She's a 5-time national champion. That's Peter Dialiesi on the left. He's a 6-day rider who got killed on one of the bikes you see here. He was killed because he was not riding with a brake, but that's not the reason he died. He was a friend of mine. He died because he could stop that bike on a dime. He was a 6-day rider. He knew how to do it. All over the city, this city, other cities, you see people riding fixies with no brakes. They don't know how to control their bikes. They're going to go down. Now, that aside, Peter Dialiesi had to go to court, or his family, there's the bike that he died on. Peter Dialiesi had to go to court because the insurance company of the SUV that hit him would not pay a dime, even though it was the driver's fault. Wouldn't pay a dime because he didn't have brakes. And we had to show that he could stop the bike without brakes. He had a glove, he could stop the bike. We had to prove to the jury that he could. Well, most of the time you can't prove that. He had the experience. So even if you can justify riding that way, it's just not functional. Fenders. Fenders are great if you ride in the rain. But fenders, especially if you're not of tall stature, create toe overlap. Unless you're a really skilled frame builder, when you turn the wheel at a slow speed, the toe of your foot can easily hit the fender and you're going down. So bikes have to be designed, if they're going to use fenders, to make sure that you don't have that toe overlap, because the people who are riding simply don't have the experience to control their bike. Lights, they're great, they're important if you ride at night. If you don't ride at night, they're extraneous. The bike riders of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s used nothing that was extraneous. In fact, they were so worried about the possibility of crashing that many of them put St. Christopher's medals on their head tubes or on their saddle seat posts to give them that little bit of extra protection. These bikes that you see are all vintage bikes that serve dual or triple purposes. Last thing I want to say is, and it has to do with helmets. The idea of riding without a helmet and the fashionability of riding without a helmet is absolutely and totally insane. Again, it's not if you're going to go down, it's when you're going to go down. And since the word's been used frequently up until now in the earlier presentations, I'll use it again. Shit happens. Wear a helmet. And that's why I think something needs to be developed for things like, these great things like City Bike, where people just put on some inflatable helmet and ride and collapse it and put it in their pocket or whatever.
Yeah, so maybe, Michel, you can speak to some of those considerations when you were designing the Bixie and City Bikes.
Well, first, I was very proud that the City of New York have decided to buy our system. You know, we are celebrating this year the 50th year of that project. We have 38,000 bicycles that are riding on 3 continents. It is a real great success. And when I met Mr. Bloomberg and I presented him the new terminal for New York, he told me that he was very happy to have bought this system. And one thing I would like to say, when we installed the bicycle, the Bixie bike in London, Boris Johnson told me, this is a Rolls Royce. So I was very, very proud and happy that he would think like that. But anyway, my activity in industrial design is very diversified. I'm not a bike specialist. I am involved in so many different type of product. But when my office was commissioned to design that project, the first thing I did is I got a partnership with one of the best bike manufacturers we have in Canada, called Da Vinci, Cycle Da Vinci. So these people, it's a young company, and it's an engineering-driven company, and they are specialized in high complication bicycle, mountain bike with a lot of complicated suspension and pantograph and so on. And I came to them and asked them to design something very simple, something that would have very low maintenance, that will be very sturdy, but very simple. So it wasn't a different religion for them. But when you are used to do complicated things, simple thing can be easier. But the bicycle design was not the difficult part of our project. The difficult part of our project was to design something that's patentable. So we went to France and to Stockholm, to Paris and Stockholm, to make a value analysis of the project that existed. And I remember when we undo Vélib in Paris, we did undo all the parts of the bicycle, not to copy them, but to do better, to understand why they did what they did and to try to do better. It's always easier when you come third to learn from the 2 first and surpass them. I mean, this was our objective. So coming back to Canada, our task was to design something patentable. You know, when you enter design development in such a scale, if you have no patents, your project have no financial value. So the lawyer's office sent us a big book about 1.5 inches thick of patents. The Frenchmen, they did patent everything they did and everything they thought they might do. And the English and the American, I mean, we had about 148 patents to overcome. And it was not our intention to even copy one of these patents because we would expose ourselves to lawsuit and so on. So we succeed in having a very strong patent for the the attachment of the bicycle to the bike station. So the station was and is our biggest patent protection, because we succeed in having 7 patents with many revendication of the 7 patents. So our value is not only the quality of the product, but it's also the value of the patents. So, and this is not an easy task because, you know, we're smart, but there's many other people that are very smart. So it's not easy to come in and do something better. So, but I am very pleased with the success that we do have with this project today. One thing I would like to stress is that we have selected to use aluminum. So all the frame is made out of aluminum, mainly because of a corrosion problem. You know, in Paris, the biggest problem they have with their steel frame is that when the rust attacks the welding, the frame becomes very fragile. So with aluminum, we overcome that problem. And also, with aluminum, we have a lighter bicycle. We are 3 pounds lighter than the one in Paris, which is not easy to do.
And so Ethan, I know you also are dealing with some IP issues at the moment for your product. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit and just.
Yeah, so like Michel said, as you run a business, patents are kind of just an unnecessary part of it. The patent system's very broken, and it's expensive and cumbersome, and in the end, a patent's only as good as if you're willing to protect it, and protecting it requires lawyers, and lawyers requires money, and so at the end, like a company at our scale, we have a patent, but we can't afford to protect it. But if you're going to get funding from someone, you need to tell them you have a patent. You have to tell them. So it's really just the patent system. Totally messed up. Very, very complicated and unnecessary evil, in my opinion, of consumer products, to a certain extent, at our scale at least.
Right. And do you think that takes away from your design process or focusing on the product itself?
No, I don't think so. I think that we just do what we need to do, and if we run into an IP issue, we address it, but we try not to have that be like a deciding factor whether or not we're going to do something.
And so I guess getting to the product itself, do you want to share a little bit about where that originated and kind of the origin myth?
Yeah,
of,
sure. Well, like Edward said, bicycling for me was something that I did when I was a kid, and then I got my driver's license and you stop biking. So I grew up in the suburbs in Baltimore, and you can't ride my terrible mountain bike 10 miles to school on country roads. So, once I moved to Pittsburgh, I went to Carnegie Mellon, and I just started riding a bike as a means of necessity of getting around the city, and as did John. And that's kind of how the project started, was kind of like a budding interest in bicycles and technology and electronics and stuff like that, hacking. And it originated out of just us observing how we rode and how our friends rode. People who were just starting to ride weren't really well versed in how you should ride on the road, or the rules of the road, or even have money to afford safety products. So we kind of set out to build something which people desired outside of it being a safety product. Like the downfall of helmets, like you said, is that they're not cool. You don't put on your helmet and think like, oh man, like everyone's gonna think I'm super cool now because I have a helmet. But if you can disguise safety as something that is beautiful and desirable, well, first of all, you're putting something beautiful out in the world, and second of all, it's like tricking kids to take candy or take medicine by disguising it as candy. It's the best of both worlds, I think. But also, like, my somewhat reservation about designing for bicycles is that, I'm a little bit biased, but I think the bicycle is as close to perfect as you can get. It hasn't really changed significantly in over 100 years. It's incredibly efficient. It takes no energy to operate it. It gets you from point A to point B. It's fun. It's cheap. The average cost of owning a bicycle is about $300 a year, as opposed to, you pay more than that in gas in probably 4 or 5 months, maybe even less than that. So, it's a challenge to design something for, for a king of design, for something that's so perfect. And how do we design with it and not against it? And how do you just not make something that is a novelty, but make something that's actually useful?
Sure.
Well, in the term of helmet, lately we made a submission to install the Bixie bike in Vancouver. And one of their regulation, their bylaw is that if you ride a bike, you need to have a helmet. So we were commissioned to design a helmet system where you can rent a helmet or buy a helmet that is to the standard of the Department of Transport. So, and it's not an easy thing, because if you rent the helmet, you have to clean it after, and then the cost of cleaning it's adding to the renting level. So, and if you sell it for $7, well, people will keep it. But many people go to swim. They go swimming. We were talking about pool this morning, and everybody bring their own bathing suit. So probably it's people that ride a bike should have their helmet. So, but it's not an easy problem to solve, mainly because of financial consideration.
Yeah, I would agree that helmet use, at least in this country, is like imperative, just because you're sharing the road with vehicles who just don't care about your existence whatsoever. But if you look at other countries, the Netherlands, Denmark, countries where cycling is totally prevalent, where it's, talk about the cult of bike, like bicycles and culture are one and the same in those countries. In the Netherlands, 27% of all trips at all are made by bicycle. That's not just urban trips, that's urban, rural, anytime that you go anywhere in the Netherlands, the chances are over a quarter of the time you're using a bicycle. And so they have totally separated infrastructure. All drivers in the Netherlands are also bicyclists, so that inherently makes you safer because there's an understanding. And also helmet use is less than 1%, and their injury and fatality rates are extremely low. And that just comes from, I think we have a long way to come in this country for alternative transportation and all that kind of stuff. And when you look at countries like that, the only way you can achieve that is by ingraining it in culture. And a product can only take you so far in making you safer. Society has to make you safer. So like, for example, in the Netherlands, when you're in driver's ed, first of all, you take driver's ed at like 18 or whatever, you drive much later. They think it's crazy that we drive at 16 in America. They're like totally perplexed by it. But when you take driver's ed there, they teach you as a driver to open the driver door with your right hand, because it forces you to turn your body, and by turning your body, you have to look out the window and look in your rearview mirror and check for bicyclists so you don't door them. Whereas in America, you're texting, you're like on Tinder, and you open your door, and just like totally cream a bicyclist, and also most drivers couldn't, like, even after that happens, maybe you become more conscious, but you just don't think about it because it's not part of the culture.
Yeah, I think that's the critical issue. I mean, my experience in Belgium and Holland is somewhat extensive, and in Belgium, cycling is life. Everybody rides, separate bike paths, you have to be in them, but they're cleaned.
There's separate traffic signals for bicyclists, which they actually have on the West Side Highway. I was just rented a city bike for the first time yesterday, and that was cool.
And
but everywhere in all those countries, they have totally separated infrastructure.
But I never did understand why they don't wear helmets, because they still don't wear helmets.
But also their injury rate is extremely low.
Even many states in United States, you ride a motorcycle without helmet.
Yeah, Pennsylvania has no helmet law.
Yeah, and the death rates are much higher.
They are much higher. That's the reason they call motorcyclists organ donors. But an interesting thing that I was just reading the other day is that in Denmark in around 2008, Copenhagen, there was a big campaign because no one in Copenhagen when they ride use helmets, and so there was a big campaign to push helmet usage, and there was posters and public advertisements and stuff like that, and ridership sunk like fairly dramatically, and it actually hasn't recovered to the same numbers that it was since then. And like the European Cyclist Federation came out against the campaign, and it's a complicated issue. And as an American, I find it hard to understand, but I think that there's a much different mentality that once you put on safety equipment, you're then acknowledging that it's a dangerous behavior, and then you question that. And so that's where it gets a little bit complicated, I think. But yeah.
It is a dangerous behavior. I mean, the statistics are for the United States, the bicycle is the most owned piece of sporting equipment. Not the most used, but the most owned.
But I mean, also, you know, you say that, but I think now it's kind of shifting, right? Just culturally, where we have something like, you know, Uber or Zipcar, where you share the car, and now the bike share is kind of the extension of that, which is what I was getting at, you know, when you're talking about it as a service. So I just think, you know, I know Ethan, you were pretty impressed with just City Bike and also the infrastructure here in New York.
Yeah.
And you know, there have been some stories about it recently, and some of that has to do with the management. But I think just overall, it's you can only see it as a good thing, right?
Yeah, I was definitely. I've been to New York many times. I'm not from here, but I've never ridden a bike here before. Yesterday, when I rented a City Bike, because it's just. I was talking to Tim Parsons last night at dinner, and he was saying that in Chicago, he was talking to one of the guys in his local bike shop, and the guy described it as like the bike share program is a gateway drug, because once you give people easy access, then that can start the ball rolling, and you know, by putting more bikes on the streets, you're inherently making bicyclists safer because there's more awareness and there's more visibility. And by putting more bikes on the streets, you increase infrastructure, and there's policy that gets involved. But like, there's always arguments that people say when governments or cities want to put in new bike lanes. People say, you know, there's no bikers here. Why would you put in a bike lane? You're wasting our parking spaces. You know, we need whatever, another lane in this highway. And then once you put the bike lane in, suddenly there's thousands of riders using it every day. And so it's about giving people access. And maybe it's part of a boom, and maybe the boom will have a bust. Usually that's inevitable, but I think that there's still going to be some kind of long-term effect from this current boom. And then there definitely is a boom, but I think that in the future we're going to see a lot more bicycle-focused policy, and I think we're going to see a lot more people taking up bicycling in cities.
You know, City Bike is really a mobile street furniture. It's something that is there to help people to move around from one point to another. It's not a performance or a speed bike. It's really a mobile street furniture object.
Unfortunately, that if you go to the bike stores, say in New York, most of the bikes that you'll see for sale at every price level are, for example, carbon fiber bikes. Exactly what people don't need.
Yeah.
I mean, a carbon fiber bike is good for one fall, and that's it. An aluminum bike is perfect. I mean, no question about it. So even if you don't use City Bike, you use your own bike, the culture has to, the commercial culture has to respond to what the actual needs of the riders are, and not what happens to be the bike of the day, which right now is carbon fiber.
But the stealing of the bike is a very important emotional factor.
And that's also an
Because
issue.
if you take a city bike, then you abandon for lunchtime, you don't worry if it will be stolen or so that's a very important effect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can also kind of strike the balance, right? So, you know, with the project or the lights, you know, that is something that you will buy and put on your bike because you want to be different. And,
Right.
But then on the flip side of it, right, it makes it more likely to get stolen. But, you know, I think overall, you know, it's like you said, you know, it kind of makes it cool to be safe, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, one thing the big thing we're trying to do is, because like this is not something that needs to be done in Europe, but it's something that needs to be done here, is we're trying to, you know, create a conversation between drivers and bikers and helping drivers to understand bicyclists. So we see the product as a communication platform between, a passive one, between cyclists and drivers. So cars have establish lighting paradigms, right? You have taillights. When you're driving on the highway, you know when someone's stopping, you know when someone's turning. You know a lot of information about a vehicle at night based on its lights, but bikes have none of that. And so if they're going to be accepted as members of the roadway, and if people are going to respect them as vehicles, they have to be illuminated as such. And the paradigm for cars may not work on bicyclists. So what we're trying to do is create a lighting paradigm for bicyclists and lower the barrier of entry for people, just like City Bike is doing. We're trying to do on a high level the same exact thing. Because you can't only ride during the day. If you're going to be riding as a practical means of transportation, you're going to be riding at night, and if you're going to be riding at night, you need to be illuminated properly because we don't have separated infrastructure. You have to share the road.
Correct, yeah, I agree, yeah.
I agree also.
Yeah. Well, I think time is about up, so it's the cult of the bike. Hopefully we have some new members out there. I want to say, they say you never forget how to ride a bike, so this is about kind of remembering why we ride bikes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.